Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I am Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am excited today for our conversation with Michael Salvato, Smart Infrastructure Asset Management and Project Delivery with Mott MacDonald. Before we get underway, we just want to thank our patron members. We have a growing list. Most recently, Jacobs joined the team, and we also have an also growing list of organizational members. We especially want to highlight the US tag today and Mott MacDonald, but the US tag to ISO TC 251 is this week's ALN Thursday at 3 sponsor. So thank you for their continuing support. And just one more quick plug before we get going here. Culture of Value, Sustainable Infrastructure 2022. That is our upcoming event that will take place September 16th at the National Academy of Sciences building in DC. So if you're interested in that, you can register on our website, and we'll probably talk more about that before this session ends here. And with that, I'll say if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat, or use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. And with that, I will say, Jim Dieter, take us away.
Great. Thanks, Nick. It's good to be back in the chair doing a ALN Thursday at 3. We had a summer break, and Mike Bernaro had been doing many of these in the last few weeks. We were doing them into the early summer before we took our summer hiatus. So welcome back to everybody joining us today. We're glad to have you, whether you're watching in person or further on down the line, watching the recording. And we're very happy to have Michael Salvato with us today. And I finally learned how to pronounce his name right today. So thanks to Nick asking him how to pronounce it. That's excellent. Welcome, Michael. How are you?
Hi, Jim. How are you? It's been a while since we've been in a long conversation, but I cherish those days 10 years ago when we were doing it quite frequently.
Yeah, we've done some interesting stuff. I do notice, Michael, that when you were working in New York City on the government side, that you often had a look of tension in your eyes, like you had the weight of the world on your shoulders, and you look more smiling and relaxed now. So must be good working at Mott MacDonald.
Yeah, it's good working with Mott MacDonald. It's always good to work on the client side or working for the asset owner, where you have the responsibility for the performance of these assets and their evolution.
Yeah.
It was great working at the MTA. It was a great experience for me.
Yeah, awesome. That's amazing. We'll have a time to get to some of those stories too. But as you were saying that, it reminds me of my years, many years ago, working retail and working in hardware stores, which I really loved because I could help people. People came in and said, well, how do I, and of course, this is long before YouTube videos on how to do everything. And, got to help a lot of people solve their problems. And I think I have found consulting can work, in a very similar fashion, working with team to help people. It's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
So usually we start off by saying, so how did you get to today? How did you get involved in asset management? What's some version of that story?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. I'm really excited to share some of these stories. I think my journey is a kind of interesting one, and particularly the experiences at the MTA. There's lots and lots of lessons to be shared with people from that experience. I've always been interested in the built environment since I was a boy. I knew I was going to be building things all my life. I started as an architect, but then I decided that I was actually more interested in why we build what we build rather than what we build. My degrees are actually in economic geography and in urban planning. And in both cases, I looked at industrial policy, innovation, and economic development as a way of kind of shaping the built environment, always with that idea of how does policy, how does innovation shape our built environment. I still think I'm consistent with that work today. that vision, that mission. I think I set out myself as a boy. So I have done several different careers prior to joining the MTA. As I mentioned, I was in engineering, construction, architecture for many years, both in the field and in the office. That gave me a real flavor of both the physical environment itself, but also the process of engineering and designing and managing the design of the built environment. But I also spent a good 10 years in economic policy and economic development. So I also understood the policy aspects of it and the importance of standards and practices for the purposes of industrial development. And so I had both those lenses when I joined the MTA, which was about 25 years ago, just around 1998, I guess, when I joined. I joined the MTA in their capital program area, and I was working on high technology capital program management and budget. So I would be responsible for the budget for many of our large scale technology projects, including the new signal systems, our communication systems, our electrical systems. And what I realized really quickly is that the model that the MTA was using, and today we still use today, around state of good repair, really was insufficient for the technologies and the technological regime that we were entering. And it was about the time that Pass 55 was issued, which I think was, if I remember correctly, 2005 or 2004.
Mhm.
And I latched onto that pretty quickly as really that is the next generation. I was doing work on the future of the MTA and the past of the MTA. I wrote a paper on the history of the MTA capital plan with New York University. At the same time, I was investigating or asked to think about its future. And I believed at that time, as I do today, that the evolution of capital program management and capital budgeting from state of good repair to asset management was a fundamental change that was going to happen around the world and was going to happen at the MTA. So I became a very strong champion of that. I championed it. I was the first person to champion that in the MTA. I had a couple of different other careers at the MTA, one of which will be very pertinent to this question. But I also then moved to large scale mega programs and was involved in the rebuilding of the lower Manhattan after September 11th. And I was on the program executive team, and we were responsible for $2 billion worth of reconstruction work after September 11th. And then Jay Walder became the chairman, and he set up a internal management consulting team in the inklings of McKinsey. He was from McKinsey, and he didn't want to pay McKinsey prices, so he set up his own management consulting team, and I got on that team, and I was pretty successful at it. I was sent to the frontline departments and helped them kind of turn around their operations. And what I noticed, I started to have a shtick. It was always the same thing. They needed to get their asset management practices together. They needed to apply information technology strategically. And they also, they were still going to fail because this was all about change and change management.
Yeah.
And that became something that I was good at. And the president of New York City Transit at the time, Tom Pendergast, saw me championing asset management, and it was something that was important to him, and he knew it wasn't well known both at the MTA and in the community at large, and he sponsored the development of the asset management program. So that would have been 2010, I guess, that started. So he sponsored it, he set up the program, and he asked me to kind of champion that, and I championed the asset management program at the MTA for about 10 years.
Wow.
It was a fairly substantial program. It started from nothing. And by the time I left, we were spending, between 60 and $70 million a year to advance our asset management program. That included technology, consultants, staff, training, travel, everything. It was a pretty substantial commitment that the MTA made at that. And just let me give you the scale. First of all, let me tell you about the scale of the MTA. The MTA is larger than the next 10 transit authorities in the United States combined. It has 5 different modes. So it has bridges, tunnels, buses, metros, underground, and commuter rails, as well as a whole gob of facilities related to that activity. We valued it. One of my activities, as you know, asset management, putting value on assets. So we did a valuation exercise. We put the actual value of the MTA, absent its real estate value, as $1 trillion.
Wow.
So it was a substantial portfolio of assets. And we did kind of the multiple things that you would see in a complex asset management transformation program, which includes the asset management assessments across all modes, gap assessments, strategic asset management strategies, and asset management plans, which included compliance with the new FTA requirements, which actually came in after we had started our program. So we had already started asset management years before the FTA had required it. We also purchased a suite of technologies, including GIS, asset performance management, integration platforms, CMMS systems, mobility applications, and we were integrating them across, again, all those different modes. We were doing a lot of business process re-engineering. I started the Lean Six Sigma program at the MTA. Right now, we have over 200 not black belts, but belted employees who love this program. And I was there recently for the first time in a long time, and they were doing a workshop with 75 people in the boardroom. And I'm told that they're booking $45 million worth of savings over 5 years as a result of the asset management Lean Six Sigma program. So that's a substantial reduction in bookable costs. And as you know, you can only book a small portion of the actual impact on your books. And we also were very committed to maintenance and reliability, improved maintenance practices, and introducing reliability-based maintenance practices. So we set up those communities as well. We set up the information management framework and the standards compliant with what that was then was, I guess, past 1192, and then became now ISO 19650. And of course, and we can't emphasize enough, this was all about change management. We knew that from the very beginning. The technical stuff is really easy compared to the people stuff. And so we made change management one of the key pillars of the program, and we did lots and lots and lots of change management. And when I left, the change management teams were reporting to the chief of staff of the entire organization. They basically graduated from my program and they became the domain of the chief of staff, which was really important for the MTA, because after I left, and I think Mildred Chua may be on the phone, but the MTA then began what would be ultimately their organizational transformation program, in which asset management and change management were key pillars of that. The work that we had done years before became anchors for that larger program that was undertaken by the chairman of the MTA at the time.
Michael, let me ask you, did you find a pull between the very operational asset management and the strategic asset management? And, was that part of your change management plan to work those out, or was that never an issue for you?
Well, I mean, I think it's true. The thing about asset management, it's everything and nothing at the same time. And depending on what lens or view or role you play, you look at it from a very, very different perspective. And that's, I think we all know that simply from an asset perspective. The CFO sees an asset from one perspective, the chief engineer sees it from another perspective, the chief of maintenance sees it from another perspective, and of course our customers see it from another perspective. And so that's a fundamental role and responsibility for someone in the asset management community to understand those different views and those different perspectives and the different languages that people use to talk about asset management. Again, I'll talk about Mildred again, but one of the things that Mildred and I and she in particular, after I left, championed, was the idea of reconciling capital assets on the books, on the financial assets,
Yeah.
and reconciling that with the chart of assets. So aligning the chart of accounts with the chart of assets, which isn't an easy thing to do. It sounds easy, but it's not. It's a major undertaking, and it takes focus and technical expertise to make that happen. And so again, that's kind of two different languages and trying to sync them up.
Yeah.
I think at the time you and I were talking, there was the idea, you're talking, engineers talking to, you got to help engineers talk to the finance department. You have to have the finance department talk to the engineering department. And the assets management role was to be the translator of those two languages.
Yeah, good. So you were there 20 years and you left. Did you retire from the MTA, or was it just time to?
Nope, I was able to
move on?
retire from the MTA.
Wow, that's awesome. So tell us about Mott MacDonald. What are you doing there, and what's that about?
Yeah, so when I retired, I knew, I still have a long career ahead of me, and I'm actually feel like I'm at the prime of my capacity to have an impact. And I was
Yeah.
looking for a firm that kind of matched some of my interests. First of all, I'm very focused on civil infrastructure. So I wanted a company that was focused on the sectors that I'm interested in: transportation, energy, water, primarily, and then the built environment itself, but not necessarily architecture as a perspective, but as facilities. The second is I have one of the blessings that Tom gave me was to be able to travel the world and talk to people about best practices in asset management. I was sent out on several safety audits, and I was also able to just simply go out and engage people around asset management. And so I found the folks in Australia and in the UK particularly consistent with my thinking. And so I was looking for a firm that had found a good foundation in both of those areas, again, in the sectors that I was interested in. And the third thing that really attracted me to Mott MacDonald was some of the thought leadership work that was being done and the role that Mott MacDonald was playing in that thought leadership. As you know, we've talked about asset management, ISO 55000. We also saw the development of BIM and the acceptance of BIM in the UK as standard practice in the infrastructure sector. They call it BIM level 2, or their digital built Britain strategy. So they made that just standard practice in the UK, and that's something that I wanted access. And then there's a lot of work in smart infrastructure, some of which you guys may be familiar with, coming out of the Center for Smart Infrastructure and Construction at Cambridge. And Mott has been actively involved in developing those principles and practices. My close friend now, Mark Enzer, is one of the leaders in that. And just lastly, thing that attracted me to Mott was the work that we were doing in the digital twin. Mark Enzer was the chair of the National Digital Twin Program for several years. And that was establishing the principles and practices in the information management framework for basically a system of system digital twins in the UK framework, which is very impressive work that you guys should all kind of take a look at.
Wow. So we have a question that somebody wondered if you could talk a little bit more about change management and organizational culture, and why is that so important? Or you have any other further insight you could share about how that works?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two things. I mean, first of all, we're working with mainly a lot of engineers, and we're working with assets that tend to have long lives. So change is not something engineers and long life assets are really comfortable with. And yet the standards and practices that and the management practices that we're talking about of improving and optimizing and introducing information technology, just in that kind of recently, really does require change. It requires organizational change. It requires cultural change. It requires people to get onto that continuous learning route for themselves as individuals and as organizations. And that takes intentional activity. It's not something that happens naturally in the environments that we're working on. But I think today it's even more important. I personally, and now that I'm with MacDonald and I have more freedom to do this, the consequences of climate change, the requirements of meeting the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees centigrade, no change above that, the need for infrastructure resilience, and the desire to maintain social contract through social equity, through infrastructure provision, really require deep change. And it requires all of us to get involved in change. And again, there's lots of different types of change. And if you look at systems and ways systems change, there's different levels at which you can affect change. And one of the most important levels that you can affect change is affect people's mindsets. And I think one of the reasons why I like asset management is because it is a new mindset that can affect significant change in an organization.
Wow. So I have several things I want to say. That's impressive. But Cecilia Mott has asked a question of over your distinguished career, how, have you seen a change in leadership and involvement, getting stakeholder involvement, and how that impacts decision-making processes?
I think one of the things, again, that's been a blessing for me is to be able to work in different cultures and see how it's different in different places and in different organizations. And change and people's willingness to change are different in different places. So you're seeing significant cultural changes in, say, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand around these topics, things that I'm familiar with, where they are making significant change in stakeholder participation. You're starting to see that also in different individual organizations in the United States. And ones that I'm closely familiar with is, and I encourage people to take a look at, is the New York Power Authority. They went through both the asset management transformation, the digital transformation, and the energy transformation, all very rapidly, all very successfully, and all with a lot of kind of sensitivity to the human dimensions of those changes within their organization and outside their organization. So I think they're an organization that represented kind of a progressive approach to both asset management and renewable energy portfolios.
Yeah, I got to deal just a little bit with the New York Power Authority, and I was impressed by their willingness to make decisions.
Yep.
And it's hard to overstate how important that is to have leaders that lead and they can take on information and make good decisions. But so we need to get to talking about our fall event and this New York Academy of Sciences study, and that's one of the key topics of our September 16th event. Can you give us a little background on that and what it's about?
Yeah, so there's kind of three origin stories. So at the MTA, and all that complexity that I described, I found that myself and a bunch of others were increasingly relying on systems engineering and enterprise architecture practices. And we were introducing it into the civil infrastructure environment where it wasn't normal. But it was absolutely essential to manage the complexity of what we were doing. And we wrote some papers around that, internal papers around what that was and what that looks like. And when I left the MTA, I started to champion that concept of systems approach to enterprise transformation and the role of enterprise architecture in that. And I was championing kind of looking for investments in research that kind of does that. At the same time, again, my colleagues in the UK have been also strongly championing systems approaches to civil infrastructure and the role of systems engineering in delivering civil infrastructure programs and complex projects. And so there was a kind of a drumbeat to advance this type of thinking. So eventually, the New York Academy of Science program manager for the built environment liked the topic enough to say, well, let's go look for some grants together. And the United Engineering Foundation, which was which is the foundational or the nonprofit or the civic arm of the IEEE, which is electrical, the American Society of Civil Engineers, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, Chemical Engineers, and Mining, financed the research that we undertook.
Wow.
And our premise was, and so I want to thank the United Engineering Foundation for doing that, and for the New York Academy of Science for hosting this work. And so our premise, again, was to introduce enterprise systems engineering and enterprise architecture practices into the civil infrastructure environment. So these are practices that are well known and well used in defense, aerospace, deep space, in many, even in, finance and other service industries. These are pretty common practices, but they're really not well used in civil infrastructure. And so our goal was to create what we call an architectural framework, which are, in a sense, the basic rules, the basic premises for designing an enterprise system. And we wanted to bring 4 domains together: asset management, systems engineering, enterprise architecture, and information management. We felt those were 4 fundamental domains, each of them with their own language, that we wanted to kind of set up as a reference architecture for doing it. And at the heart of that really is the business capabilities model associated with asset management, and even the 6-box model that people on this phone would be all familiar with.
Yeah, and that came out, what, a year or 2 ago?
Yeah, so we finished that work last year.
Yeah.
And we issued and published it, I guess, in the fall. And we asked the stakeholders if they wanted to go forward, and they all wanted to do that.
Excellent. So can you share with us a little bit about what you'll be talking about in the event at the National Academies in September?
Yeah, I guess it would be kind of 4 topics. So I guess there is the motivation, the kind of context under which we undertook this work, the why we felt it was necessary. The second is the principles and practices associated with enterprise systems engineering and enterprise architecture. And just kind of quick introduction to that. The third is that we did 2 things that were pretty significant. We kind of created the ontology using standards like ISO 55000 and ISO 19650 and stuff for civil, for information technology and systems engineering. We'll talk about the ontology, but the ontology is kind of static. What we also did is we create a systems model, a viable systems model of an infrastructure where those ontologies are interrelated to each other. We talked about the interrelationships. Then we did some case examples, some kind of to demonstrate the systems approach using this ontology was a viable a framework for thinking about civil infrastructure from a systems perspective. And I know I said 4 things, but I'll probably go into 1 more. What I really want to do is share the program that we're anticipating moving forward. The goals that we're looking at is to take kind of an ontological systems approach to address the problems of decarbonization, infrastructure decarbonization, infrastructure equity, infrastructure resilience, and infrastructure sustainability, and ask the question of whether or not systems, enterprise systems engineering and enterprise architecture is an appropriate solution tool set to solve those at scale and at pace. That's kind of what we're trying to do.
That's fantastic. So, maybe time for 1 more quick question before Nick cuts us off is, briefly, where do you see asset management going in the United States in 5 or 10 years out?
Well, I mean, it is absolutely essential to be common throughout the sector. I think the standards and practices become shared and consistent. What I personally would like to see is the academics and the engineers understand that, you know, beyond engineering, the physical assets, you have to manage these assets and you have to manage the change, and you need practices like asset management to be managers of these infrastructure organizations. You have to understand how to manage it. You just don't graduate, you just don't evolve into it. You actually have to take on the responsibilities of managers to be holistically understand how that system plays itself, how that system works systemically, and the relationship between the physical asset, the management systems and decision-making that has to be made, and the outcomes and services that that system provides. And it's essential. The practices that asset managers bring to the table are essential in that formula.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Before I let Nick cut me off, because I did want to say, to join us September 16th, for our events at the National Academies. If you have never been, this is our first in-person event in a while, of course. And if you've never been to the National Academies, even if there's no program, the place is worth going to. But we're going to have an amazing program, and there's limited space. So we hope people will sign up and join us for the event and meet and talk to Michael and many other interesting thought leaders in asset management that are going to help us get to that future Michael's talking about. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, we just want to be respectful of everyone's time, especially yours, Michael. And so thank you all so much for being here with us for ALN Thursday at 3. Thank you to our patron members as well as our other organizational members, especially Mott MacDonald and the US TAG for sponsoring this week's session. And then, yeah, again, the event that we're talking about, we would love to see you there September 16th. So sign up on our website. And with that, I think we'll say we'll see you soon next week.
Enjoyed it, Michael. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thanks.